What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this we're going to take a look at the best defenders at every single price point. If you have been enjoying this video series, please do keep up the support by hitting that like button, of course, subscribing if you haven't done so already. And if you've not already checked out Fantasy Football Hub, I'd highly recommend that you do. All the links you need for that are in the description below. So let's start with the most expensive players. You've got Trent Alexander-Arnold, who at 8 million is the most expensive defender in the game. Then you also have Trippier and Robertson at 6.5. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't know how much I can help your decision about whether or not to start with Trent, because I am so undecided. Like in my most recent draft I put up on YouTube, he wasn't in the team, and part of the advantage to not having him is you can put that money into midfield and your kind of forward line, and also there are loads of 5 to 5.5 million defenders that are great value. But then I look at the stats, I look at the fixtures, and I'm thinking, we know how incredible he can be in FPL. Why is he not in the draft? Like, fixture-wise, it's not ideal that they have Chelsea away and Newcastle away in game weeks 1 and 3. But outside of that, it's Bournemouth at home, Villa at home, Wolves away and West Ham at home. None of them are that bad. And any dodgy fixtures are kind of counteracted by the fact he's so attacking. And we can all see that when we watch Liverpool. But sometimes seeing the numbers on screen helps me visualise it. Like 0.44 expected goal involvement per 90 is higher than a lot of attackers. So all of a sudden I'm thinking for 8 million, he's a fantastic option. I know people like to compare him to midfielders for the same price. I kind of get that. But obviously part of the combination is who else you have. So Trent and a 5 to 5.5 million midfielder versus a 5 to 5.5 million defender plus an 8 million midfielder. That combination probably wins out. So it really isn't an easy decision. All I will say is I think right now both ways are viable. So if you're looking at your team without Trent thinking it looks great, that's perfectly fine. If you're looking at it with Trent, thinking it looks great, no harm with including him whatsoever. I think right now, I'm leaning more towards trying to fit him in. But we're going to have to wait until we get closer to game week 1. I know it's rubbish. I like to have clear opinions where I can, but with Trent, I'm finding it tough. At 8 million, fantastic option, but not necessarily essential. The 6.5s, a little bit easier to talk about. I don't think I'm going to start with either of them. I think you look at Trippier's attacking numbers and see what he did last year, there's obviously potential there. Whether or not Newcastle will keep up the defensive performances, we'll have to see. And I'm not saying they're going to suddenly be in a relegation fight. Far from it. They are definitely going to be competing for Europe. But they were the second best defence last year for expected goals conceded. And I just wonder if they'll be quite that good again. They'll probably still be high enough up there. They're still a really good defensive target when the fixtures are decent. But it doesn't really worry me that I'm not going to start with Trippier. Like game weeks 2 to 4, Man City away, Liverpool at home, Brighton away. They are 3 very hard games for clean sheets. So despite the attacking potential, I just don't think I'm going to go for him. The only thing that maybe slightly concerns me is that from game week 5 onwards, the fixtures are quite good for Newcastle. So Brentford at home, Sheffield United away, Burnley at home, West Ham away, Crystal Palace at home, Wolves away. You can see plenty of clean sheets. And when they do get clean sheets, Trippier often picks up bonus. And most of us are setting up with a squad where it's very difficult to get him. So I think you almost have to commit so you're not getting him if you start without him in game week 1. Obviously, something could crop up. Trent gets injured. It's a very easy downgrade. But I think from game week 5 onwards, most of us are going to struggle to get him. The only good thing is you can get Botman for 2 million less and Share for 1.5 million less. So it might not be the end of the world. So Trippier, I just don't think is worth starting with. And similar with Robertson, like I think the Liverpool fixtures are okay. But I think with Trent, they're mostly okay because he's so attacking. With Robertson, that's not quite the case. And if they do continue with this setup where Trent's going into midfield, Robertson's going to play as the left centre-back. And he still will get forward at times, but not as much as we're used to. So for 6.5, I just think I'd rather go to one of the 5 to 5.5 million defenders and just save a bit of cash instead. So at the £6 million price point, there's not really a huge amount to talk about. I did see that Cancelo is back in pre-season training for Man City, but I suspect that bridges have been burnt there. I just cannot see a scenario where he's starting in game week 1 unless loads of the defence is injured. And also, Pep made a comment, not directly about him necessarily, but something along the lines of, I've learned that I need defenders that can defend, and that's not really Cancelo. Obviously, he provides a different profile, and at some point during the season, that might be useful to Pep if he remains in the squad, but I just don't see him starting for game week 1. And also, the kind of Ake, Diaz, Stones, Akanji type back four works so well, I just wonder why he would change that straight away. So Cancelo's not going to be an option. Who knows? At some point maybe, but not in game week 1. With Van Dijk, 6 million is maybe not a bad price. He's 0.5 less than Robertson. Doesn't have a huge amount less attacking potential either. But if Konate is going to be his partner, he's only 5 million. So if you really wanted to get into that Liverpool defence without paying for Trent, you'd probably just go for him for a whole 1 million less. So at some point, Van Dijk might be an option. Obviously, he's completely nailed on, around double game weeks and stuff like that. We might want 2 defenders. But I think for now, I'm probably either paying for Trent or I'm just going for Konate, or I'm just ignoring Liverpool completely. So you've probably heard me mention the My Team tool on Fantasy Football Hub a few times now, but I thought I would run you through how it works because it can be very useful, especially looking at defensive rotation and stuff like that. If you want to get your team rating, which you can see on screen for my current draft is 94%, just click that link in the description below. That is completely free. But what you can do is use it as a planner as well. So I know in game week 1, I'm going to play Gabriel home to Nottingham Forest, Estepinian home to Luton and Shaw home to Wolves. But as you can see from my recent draft, I've got Chilwell on the bench. Not a great fixture in game week 1, but if I just scroll through, if I can see my mouse here, I can then go and see what fixtures they've got in other game weeks. So for game week 2, obviously happy to play Gabriel again against Crystal Palace, happy to play Estepinian against Wolves, but Luke Shaw has got Spurs away. So even though Chilwell, at least I keep talking about the fixture swing in game week 3, they've got West Ham away in game week 2, and I would say that is probably better than the fixture that Luke Shaw has. So I can put him in and then see how my team rating and my points projections go up and just see if there's any better transfers to make. And obviously I can keep going through this. I'm not going to go through every single game week, but you get an idea of how it works. And again, I've then got Luke Shaw on the bench for Nottingham Forest at home, and I can decide whether I want to bench one of these players or possibly even an attacker instead. So it'll give you a really good idea of where you might need to make transfers or how you could possibly start with a different defender instead. Like if I was happy to play Chilwell at home to Liverpool game week 1, and then I want him for West Ham away instead of Luke Shaw, maybe in some certain scenarios, depending on how your squad is set up, you could start with Chilwell instead of Luke Shaw. So it can be really handy. If you want to check that out and all the other tools that Fantasy Football Hub have to offer, you can sign up to one of their memberships as well. There's up to 50% off at the moment. Links in the description below. So there's a few nice options at 5.5 million, but if I was only going to select one, it would likely be Luke Shaw. Even though the Man United fixtures are slightly worse opening 6 versus Chelsea or Man City, I think you know what you're getting with Shaw. Like attacking potential is pretty good. He takes some set pieces. When he's fit, he's nailed on to start pretty much every single game. United got the most clean sheets last year, and I think defensively you would back them ahead of Chelsea. I guess Man City defence is better, but if I'm thinking about minutes for Shaw versus minutes for Ruben Dias, plus taking into account attacking potential, that would put Luke Shaw ahead for me. There is more consideration than that for a defender. Like in isolation, Luke Shaw is probably the best, but when you start thinking about combinations, it can be a little bit different. So if you wanted to cover the Man United and the Man City defence, and you needed one goalkeeper, one defender, and we assume that Onana comes in at 5 million, then it's cheaper to have Onana and Dias or Stones than it is to have Shaw and Edison. So at that point, maybe you go for the Man United goalkeeper and Man City defender. But like I said, in isolation, I'd probably go for Luke Shaw. When it comes to Ben Chilwell, you know how much I like the Chelsea fullbacks. They're very attacking. The fixtures look pretty good. Obviously, there are fitness concerns. If both James and Chilwell were nailed and fit to start every single game, I would probably pick James, but I think there's just far too many injury concerns with him right now. There just always seems to be an issue, and Ben Chilwell has proved his fitness more recently. So right now, that is my preference. There is obviously a bit of competition for that left-back spot from someone like Cucurella, but I think between the two, Chilwell is definitely the better fullback, so I'd expect him to be first choice. And I am kind of tempted for my own team to start with him on the bench, ready for that fixture swing in game week 3. So like I said, there's a lot of value at 5.5. With the Man City defenders, I do think Ruben Dias's minutes are generally going to be better than John Stones, but they are part of the best 11, so they're both as nailed on as each other. I just think if Pep's going to rest one, it's more likely to be Stones than it is for Diaz. That's why I've put him ahead. But attacking potential is slightly higher for Stones, but there's not really much in it. If you prefer John Stones instead, then you should definitely go for him. With no European matches and stuff like that at the start of the season, it could be worth going for a Man City defender because they are the best defence in the league and those fixtures are absolutely elite. So, yeah, Man City look good. They all look great for 5.5. And this is kind of what I was saying just a minute ago. You compare any of these players to a 5.5 midfielder, there's hardly any contest whatsoever. In terms of the other options at 5.5, I don't get why you would go for Ben White. You can get Arsenal defenders for 0.5 million less. Ben White doesn't really offer anything better in terms of minutes or attacking potential. Reece James and Stones I already kind of mentioned, and Luke Shaw's the only other one. So let me know out of the 5.5s, who are you going for? So 5 million defenders is another price point with a lot of value, and the two standout options for me are probably Gabriel and Estepinian. The reason that I've got Gabriel top is I just rate the Arsenal defence so highly. I think minutes-wise he's probably the best out of the bunch as well, and he also has some attacking threat from set pieces, and the opening 6 fixtures for Arsenal are pretty decent. The hardest 2 games being Man United and Spurs are both at home, and just in case this is the first video you've watched of pre-season on my channel, the reason that I prefer Gabriel to Zinchenko is because I think his minutes are better. The reason that I prefer Gabriel to Saliba is because Gabriel's goal threat is better, and the reason I prefer Gabriel to White is he's 0.5 million cheaper, so that's why he's number 1 for me. With Estepinian, it is hard to ignore his attacking potential. 0.24 expected goal involvement per 90 minutes. Doesn't really have a huge amount of competition for that left back spot. Last season, De Zerbi did say that Lamptey could play there as like a backup and stuff like that, but Lamptey is hardly ever fit. So even if he's fit for game week 1, I'd be very surprised if he's still fit by like game weeks 5 or 6. So I don't think he's going to be a huge issue. Maybe that's different around the Europa League games, possibly. But for me, that's just not a concern from game week 1. I think Brighton's defensive kind of capabilities plus Estepinian's attacking potential for 5 million is just too good to turn down, especially when the next best defender in that team, Dunk, is also 5 million. So Estepinian I'll probably... almost certainly start with. The only thing to say, which kind of Ross, FPL Raptor, mentioned the other day, the fixtures after the first 3 are not necessarily that great. Like Newcastle at home, Man United away in game weeks 4 and 5. You got Villa away in game week 7, Liverpool at home in game week 8, Man City away in game week 9. But I think for 5 million... it's too good to turn down, especially when he's cheap enough to rotate. You could bench him if you needed to. And because he's so attacking, if you had to play him in those trickier games, it really wouldn't be the end of the world. In terms of who the next best option is, that becomes a little bit more difficult. And again, there are other considerations when it comes to defenders. And for 5 million, they're not necessarily players you have to play every week. So you could bench them in some games. And then it just comes down to which week do you need them. I've chosen Fabian Schär as kind of number 3 because his goal threat is so good. I think for 0.5 million more than Botman, he is worth it if you've got the money to spare. But as we discussed with Trippier, you don't really need him till game week 5. And I don't particularly like starting game week 1 with a player I'm going to bench for at least 4 weeks, maybe even 5. So that's why I'm saying it's so difficult to pick the next best defender. But in terms of goal threat, Fabian Schär looks great. Some Newcastle fans did say to me they're looking for another right-sided centre-back, but I'd be surprised if he's not kind of first choice going into game week 1. But I guess it depends who they buy. In terms of other options you could look at, like I said, well, unless you want to go for double Arsenal defence, I wouldn't look at anywhere apart from Gabriel. Alex Moreno at Villa is an interesting choice. He is currently injured, but if he's back fit, Villa have got some pretty good fixtures you could play him in. Everton at home, Burnley away, Crystal Palace at home in the first 5 game weeks. And then after, what is it, Chelsea away and Brighton at home in 6 and 7. They've got Wolves, West Ham, Luton, Forest, Fulham. So again, a bit like Fabian Schär, the fixtures after the first few weeks are pretty good. But they do have more fixtures in the very immediate kind of future where you could play them as well. So you could argue if Moreno's fully fit, he's actually better to start with than Fabian Schär. Ben Mee is just not worth it. I think if you're going to go Brentford, you go 4.5. I mentioned Dunk. Cucurella is probably not going to be first choice. Thiago Silva might be, but ideally, the centre-back that would partner him would be 4.5, so they're the one to go for. I already mentioned Konate earlier. Possibly if you want to target Liverpool defence, you could look at him. The Man City defenders will, of course, be great value if we know which one's nailed on. But there's still talk of Vardiol coming to Man City, in which case maybe Ake medium longer term is an issue. We don't know if Walker's going to go to Bayern Munich. If he doesn't, then you've got him and Akanji for the right side. So there's a little bit too much worry for me there to consider putting one in. But if we reassess closer to game week 1, they're obviously worth it. If you get a Man City defender that's nailed on for 5 million with the fixtures they have, put them straight in your team. Man United, some of the 5 millions are either not nailed on or no real attacking potential. I think you just pay the extra 0.5 for Luke Shaw. And then the only other player to look at is probably Pedro Porro. He's probably going to be nailed in that back four for Spurs and fairly attacking. My only worry is the way the squad looks and the way they're going to set up. I think there's going to be a big transition period, like where they'll be good attacking wise, but they're going to keep leaking goals. So I'm just not sure I'd want to go there straight away. But in terms of excitement factor, Pedro Porro is one of the most attacking defenders for that price point. So if you really want a Spurs defender, you could look at him. And they obviously have that run from game weeks 3 to 5 of Bournemouth away, Burnley away, and Sheffield United at home. You wouldn't really want to play them too much outside of that in the first 7 weeks. So that might be a slight issue. But like I said, excitement factor, possibly Porro. But the standout two for me, definitely Gabriel and Estepinian. So lots of 4.5 million options. If you're looking for someone with good fixtures in the opening 6, then it's probably got to be a Brentford defender. After Spurs at home in game week 1, they got Fulham away, Palace at home, Bournemouth at home, Newcastle away in game week 5, and then Everton at home in game week 6. So at least 4 out of the first 6 fixtures, you could play them in if needed. I would probably go for Rico Henry because I don't think he really has too much competition for his place, and his attacking threat is pretty good. I do like the look of Pinnock as well. His goal threat is the highest of all Brentford defenders. I just worry a little bit about the fact they've signed Collins, and if they're going to play a back four, which they usually do, you got Ben Mee, Ethan Pinnock, and then Nathan Collins as well, so only 2 into 3. I would suspect that Ben Mee and Ethan Pinnock will be the first choice centre-backs at the start of the season, but I just don't think Pinnock is so good that it's worth taking the risk over Henry. So he's probably the one that I would go for. Next up, I got Pau Torres at Villa. Now, I might have this completely wrong, but I've included him because out of all the 4.5s, I feel like he's probably going to have the best minutes. And in game weeks 2, 3 and 5, they got fixtures you could play him in if needed. So Everton at home, Burnley away, and Crystal Palace at home. It might be that Cash is definitely first choice right back. Konsa's never going to play there, in which case I would probably go for him instead. But I kind of like the security that I think Pau Torres is going to offer. If you've got the extra 0.5 to spend, of course you can go to Alex Moreno instead. But for just 4.5, you can get Villa's latest signing. So I quite like him. I think with Botman, I'm kind of in two minds about whether he's a good option to start with. Because lots of us are going to have players like Gabriel, Shaw, Chilwell, Estepinian, maybe a City defender, that you're more than happy to just play every single week. So if that's the case, having Botman on the bench lets you have a Newcastle defender ready for their pretty good fixtures. And it is a decent defence for just 4.5 million. But on the flip side, you're putting a player on the bench that you're not going to want to play till game weeks 5 or 6. And if they do keep losing clean sheets, which the fixtures show they probably will, then they could be susceptible to quite a lot of early transfers. And I wonder by the time we get to game weeks 5 or 6, whether Botman might be 4.4 or 4.3 million. So I was quite keen on him at the start. And I guess if you had to play him in game week 1 against Villa at home, then he could be useful. But ultimately, I'm starting to kind of veer away from him and maybe just going for some of the other 4.5s, like Torres or Henry. There's loads of options you could consider. There's a huge list here. Obviously, I've already mentioned the Aston Villa defenders. I do think that Pau Torres will be ahead of Mings. You've also got Konsa and Cash as well. I probably wouldn't go for Bournemouth defenders. You've got Veltman and Webster at Brighton. Veltman could still be right back. Webster should partner Dunk. And if that happens, you could get into that Brighton defence cheaper. But I think, again, that 0.5 million is just worth it for Estepinian. Chelsea, definitely worth keeping an eye on. If you're not comfortable paying 5.5 for Chilwell or James, then one of their centre-backs at least is going to be 4.5 million. So you've got Badia, Sheila, Chalobah, and of course Colwill as well. There's reports today that Fofana has done his ACL, so he's going to be out for a very long time. They probably will go out and buy someone else, but someone like Colwill, who they really want to keep, if he's first choice for just 4.5, that's a very cheap way into the Chelsea defence if you think they're going to improve. Anderson at Palace is another one to look at. Best goal threat out of all the Crystal Palace defenders. I don't know, opening fixtures are all right. to be fair, they're probably slightly better than both Newcastle and Villa, because you've got Sheffield United away in game week 1, Wolves in game week 4, and Fulham in game week 6. And outside of that, Villa away and Brentford away are maybe not the worst fixtures to have to play him in. And Palace defence last year was pretty good. I don't know what it is. I just find the Crystal Palace defenders not exciting in the least. Not that Botman and Pau Torres are that exciting either. So you could look at them. I think Everton defenders, someone like Tarkowski, pretty decent goal threat from set pieces. I just don't rate the Everton defence whatsoever, so I'm going to skip over them. And I think that's about it. None of the Man United defenders for 4.5 are that great. I know some of the newly promoted sides have some decent defenders for 4.5 with goal threat, but clean sheet wise is just not really going to be there. And I'm just scrolling down in case I've missed anyone. Spurs defenders, their left back could be 4.5 million, either Reguilon or Udogi, I think it is. Yeah, there he is. One of those two is probably going to be first choice, and they're both 4.5. That's something that interests me as well, because the fixtures, like I said, outside of game weeks 3 to 5, when I was talking about Pedro Porro, are not that great. But you could obviously leave them in the bench because 4.5 is not that expensive. So I would keep an eye on that in pre-season, just like the Chelsea defence. And I think West Ham fixture is just not good enough, and I wouldn't probably be looking at a Wolves defender either. So loads of 4.5s. I think most people are going to start with Henry, but there are other options, especially at Spurs and Chelsea, that could emerge. And then we got the £4 million bench warmers, players that you don't necessarily want to play every single week, but because they're so cheap, it lets you spend money elsewhere. The three main ones to look at right now are probably Baldock, Bayer and Bell, all from newly promoted sides, Sheffield United, Burnley and obviously Luton. Burnley and Luton do blank in game week 2, but I don't think that matters a huge amount. Most of the time you want to keep these players on your bench. If it is someone that you think you might have to rely on early doors because you're going for some risky picks maybe in your first 11, then I probably would start with Baldock, because they got Crystal Palace at home, Forest away and Everton at home in their first 4 game weeks. Also, he plays as a wing back, so attacking potential is a little bit higher. In terms of who the best defence is, I had a look at the goals conceded for the Championship last year. They were all quite similar. I would probably put it as Burnley best defence, then Sheffield United, then Luton. So if I was going to go for one, it'd probably be in this order: Baldock, then Bayer and then Bell. In terms of attacking threat, outside of Baldock, they don't really have too much, and there's not really a huge amount to write home about here. You're not going to expect many clean sheets. They're just in there so you can spend money elsewhere. Whether or not you should start with a 4 million is probably a conversation for another video. Obviously, it lets you put a lot of money in the first 11, but as I've said many times in this video, 4.55 and 5.5 million defenders do offer so much value. I wonder if it's worth putting a little bit more on the bench that you can call upon where needed and use as part of a rotation. But if you do want a 4 million, they're the options to look at. Just quickly to go through the other players that might become options later on. I already mentioned Lamptey. I don't think he's going to become a first choice, but we'll keep an eye on him. Van Heck is also a centre-back for Brighton. I suspect it'll be a Dunk and Webster centre-back combination, but keep an eye on that as well. I think the other ones, you got Augusto at Chelsea. If James gets injured, he's only 4 million, his replacement. You got Branthwaite at Everton. A lot of Everton fans seem to think that he will be first choice as well, so we can keep an eye on that. If he is, he probably goes ahead of all those 3 players I just mentioned. And I think that is about it. In case there's anyone I've missed, I'm just going to scroll down. No, I think that's it. I don't think we're going to get many other options. So these are probably the 3 to look at. If you have enjoyed that video, give it a like. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And make sure to check out Fantasy Football Hub. Links in the description below.